Early one morning in 1982, a man managed to climb over the railings and get into Buckingham Palace. He wandered around unchallenged for half an hour until he found his way into the Queen's bedroom.
The Queen was wakened by a slight disturbance, and she thought it was Bobo, Miss MacDonald, her personal maid, coming into the room rather early. And she looked up and saw that it wasn't Bobo, but there was a man sitting at the end of her bed with his head bowed, staring at his hands, and in his hands he was holding something, which I gather later on it was discovered it was a broken glass, heavy glass ashtray.
The Queen pressed her alarm bell. Nothing happened. She rang the palace switchboard to summon the police. Nobody came. 6 minutes later, she rang again to find out where they were. Still, she was alone with the intruder.
It was unfortunate, really, because the Queen's footman always takes the dogs out first thing in the morning, and he was out of the building with the dogs at the time, and the page wasn't on duty at that time. So the floor was virtually empty. The housemaids would have probably gone to breakfast. The Duke of Edinburgh had gone away, I think.
The first person on the scene was a housemaid, carrying her cleaning equipment down the corridor.
I saw the Queen's bedroom door open, and then she bobbed round her head and then the top half of her body, and then her hand sort of beckoned me to go that way, and I thought, that's very strange, you know, what's happening?
Inside, Liz Andrew found the man, Michael Fagan, sitting on the bed, holding his jagged piece of glass.
So I just said, what's he doing here? And the Queen said, don't worry. I said, turned to the Queen and I said, are you all right? So she said, yes. The Queen was trying to pacify him. And then he said, I need a cigarette. The Queen opened the door, but stood behind it. And I stood next to her. And Michael Fagan went out first. Then I went out. The Queen followed us and went into her sitting room.
Just then, the footman returned with the corgis. The Queen took control of the dogs while he sent Liz Andrew for help.
And I have never run so much in all my born days along the corridor.
Eventually, the police did turn up and relieved the cool-headed Queen of her unwelcome guest.
The buzzer went, and it was the Queen who said to me, and I remember it vividly, Michael, I've had a man in my bedroom. And then all hell broke loose.
The intruder turned out to be mentally disturbed. He didn't attack the Queen, but it could have been a disaster. It's incredible that anyone could walk off the street and into the Queen's bedroom without being stopped. And it's perhaps a sign of the changing times that no one in authority took the rap for it.
I didn't think it could happen. I was sure it couldn't happen. Because they heaven knows that there are troops surrounding the palace, there are people on duty day and night. And yet there was a gap in the security.
Responsibility for the Queen's safety lay ultimately with the Home Secretary, William Whitelaw. He was in charge of the Metropolitan Police, but he was also vital to the stability of the Thatcher government. He contemplated falling on his sword, but was quickly persuaded to stay.
Whitelaw felt that he ought to tender his resignation. And I had an inkling of what he'd be feeling like. I had a glass of champagne ready for him. And once he'd downed that, in a sense, the episode was set in proper proportions.
Willie Whitelaw offered to resign, didn't he?
Yes, yes, indeed, Willie would. But we couldn't do without Willie. He was a wonderful person.
Looking back over the turbulent history of the last 50 years, it's often seen that the person Prime Ministers really couldn't do without was the lifelong tenant of Buckingham Palace. Of all the ceremonies over which the Queen presides, the one which best illustrates the paradox of constitutional monarchy is the state opening of Parliament. As the Queen rides in state to Westminster, she seems to be monarch of all she surveys. Yet she has no real political power. On this day, every word she utters, every policy she proclaims, has been drafted by government ministers, even if it sounds as though she's in charge.
My government will play their full
My
part.
government will energetically
My
continue.
government will continue to safeguard.
My government recognizing the hard.
My government attach the highest importance.
My government's third legislative programme.
The person who writes her speech, the Prime Minister, is summoned with all other MPs to the House of Lords to hear her read it out.
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this Honourable House.
She's done this 48 times in her reign. The ritual has barely changed for centuries.
To attend upon Her Majesty immediately in the House of Peers.
But her Prime Ministers change regularly. When they're both in London, the Prime Minister reports to the Queen once a week in a private audience. Tony Blair meets her to discuss his plans and preoccupations, just as Harold Wilson did more than 30 years ago. She cannot direct government policy, but she has the right to be consulted by the Prime Minister and to offer both encouragement and warning.
The Prime Minister, please.
Evening, ma'am.
Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
Thank you. There are only two people in the world, frankly, to whom a Prime Minister can say what he likes about his cabinet colleagues. One's the wife and the other's the Queen.
But the fact that there is somebody different, separate, uncommitted, whose only concern is to see that Parliament and government reflect the decision of her people. That is something that one just doesn't have in presidential states, and that is one of the two great advantages that Britain has. The second great advantage is that she happens to be the person filling that role with a vast experience and completely trusted by everybody from all parties.
She is about the only person that you can tell something to in complete confidence and know that confidence will never be broken. And I've done that on several occasions. Things that I would really, are in my own mind that I think are extremely important. There's just no question of it ever getting out. It never does.
Even thoughts you perhaps don't wish to share with your cabinet at a particular time, you can say to the Queen. And I did.
And you're not thinking, now, how can I put this? You're putting it as it comes.
So that is a very valuable outlet. When you're Prime Minister, you're often boxed in. At least that was my experience.
But as Prime Minister, not many people you can talk openly to. Maybe the same thing is true of a sovereign, I don't know.
The state visit seemed to go rather well, didn't it,
The South African president had just been staying at Windsor Castle with members of his government.
Yes, one of the ministers actually went for a walk at Windsor and came back, and he was sitting next to me at the banquet, and he said, "You grow maize here?" So I said, "Yes, we do." He said, "Do you eat it?" "No." I said, "It's for the cattle, because they make it into silage."
You're there for about an hour, and you sit down as we are sitting down and discuss everything.
Who was going up and who was going down, whose stock was rising, whose was falling, and so on. She was quite interested in knowing that sort of thing. It's useful to her, of course.
We went off into our own discussions about all sorts of things in life, which weren't on the official list. And nobody ever knows about any of them.
I wouldn't hesitate to restrict my remarks to the Labour Party. I would tell her what I thought about the Conservatives too, in as fair a way as I could, of course.
No officials are present and no notes taken. Her influence is cloaked in prime ministerial discretion.
The feeling in Moscow in the period I was there was just astonishing. It was actually like living with history.
It is the one time in the week
when the Prime Minister has to run through everything that is in his mind and lay it all out in a dispassionate way. And I had the opportunity of stopping to talk to some of them. Not too many of them spoke English. So I found one man who spoke beautiful English, and I asked him how he felt. And he said he was extremely interested, but he came from Woking.
That's the sort of thing that happens to me when I talk in a crowd, you know.
But I have had quite a lot of Prime Ministers, starting with Winston, and some stayed longer than others. They unburden themselves, or they tell me what's going on, or if they've got any problems. And sometimes one can help in that way too.
She wasn't always as forthcoming as that. I recall one occasion when I was perplexed about a particular problem. And I explained it to her, and I said, you know, I really don't know what to do about this. What would you do? And she looked at me with a twinkle in her eye and said, that's what you're paid for. So one didn't always get advice, even when one sought it.
I am the 10th Prime Minister of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, so she is pretty much the measure of us by now. It is more than a little awesome for me to think that the same weekly audiences that I have were once enjoyed by Churchill and Macmillan, people who to me seem figures of history.
Winston Churchill, her first Prime Minister, had fought for Queen and country in the Boer War in Victoria's reign. Now he was in his late 70s, and his new sovereign was his junior by more than half a century.
Madam, in this hall of fame and antiquity,
the Queen evoked in him every feeling of chivalry and a feeling of protectiveness towards her.
we have found out a very good plan. Here it is. The Queen can do no wrong. Hip, hip, hooray!
In 1954, the new royal yacht sailed up the River Thames, bringing the Queen home after a long world tour. It was a moment the Queen herself captured on her cine camera. Churchill had come aboard Britannia in the Channel to be the first to welcome her back, as the Queen herself recalled in a rare interview.
We had the Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, with us. He came up the river with us. One saw this dirty commercial river as one came up, and he was describing it as the silver thread which runs through the history of Britain. He saw things in a very romantic and glittering way.
The old war hero's romantic streak had charmed the Queen the night before.
After dinner, we watched a film, and the PM fell asleep. And it was very cold. And when the lights went on at the end of the film, it was discovered that he was clutching 3 cushions to his stomach in an effort to keep warm. But that night, the Queen, as she was saying goodnight to him, said, "I hope you'll sleep well." And he replied, "Now we've got you home, ma'am, I shall sleep very well indeed."
The following year, Churchill finally retired at the age of 80. The night before, she was the guest of honor at his farewell dinner in Downing Street.
It had a sort of bittersweet side to it. And my father made the most charming speech, in which he sort of started off saying that I rise to propose the toast I used to enjoy drinking when I was a subaltern in the days of your Majesty's great-great-grandmother. And then he went on how lucky we were to have her as Queen. And I think he spoke of her as the gleaming champion of a kindly way of life. It was very moving.
Jock Colville said he was madly in love with her at one level.
Well, that's not far off. That's not far wrong. I think, yes, he loved her. And she was very sweet to him. And the next day, he went off to the palace to resign.
In frock coat and top hat. That was the Churchill style.
It has always been Sir Winston's habit, when Prime Minister, to have an audience of the Queen on Tuesday night at Buckingham Palace. But this is the last. Now, the man who through the darkest days of the war would report regularly to the Sovereign all the great affairs of state is no longer Prime Minister.
Since then, the Queen has counted Prime Ministers out and counted them in. Churchill's successor was Sir Anthony Eden.
I can only say to you, thank you for all you've done. Good luck.
But in 1956 came his disastrous invasion of the Suez Canal. The humiliation for Britain brought about his downfall. The second of the Queen's 10 Prime Ministers to go.
Another one bites the dust.
This afternoon, the Queen did me the great honour to ask me to form a government.
Another one bites the dust.
Well, as you know, Her Majesty has asked me to form an administration.
Another one bites the dust.
The Queen says, are you in a position to form a government? You can say, yes, ma'am. Even if you're privately a bit worried. In a very close situation, you would probably say, ma'am, I'll go away and try and come back and tell you. Or you can say, no, ma'am, but she's put the question to you. You've got initiative now. Well, I said, yes, ma'am. Oh, sure of it.
Another one bites the dust.
The Queen has asked me to form the next government.
She had said goodbye to Harold Wilson, and I went in half an hour later, I think, and she gave me a very warm welcome.
Another one bites the dust.
I bowed and shook hands with the Queen. We sat down, and she said congratulations or something like that, and that was about it.
Hey, we're gonna get you too. Another one bites the dust.
Her Majesty, the Queen, has asked me to form a new administration.
She would recognise that I was very nervous and reacted accordingly. I will not say precisely what was said. She always knows just exactly what to say, and she was far more experienced at it than I was.
Another one bites the dust. Another one bites the dust. Ow!
It was very sad to know that that was the last time I'd go on a thing that had gone on for 11.5 years.
The last time you'd go to Buckingham Palace?
In that capacity.
We're leaving Downing Street for the last time, and we're very happy that we leave the United Kingdom in a very, very much better state than when we came here 11.5 years ago.
She understood, too, that it was arranged.
That's politics. I mean, if you aren't prepared to lose, don't enjoy winning.
I've just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind offer to form a new administration of government in this country.
She did say to me that Winston Churchill was the first Prime Minister that she dealt with, and that was before I was born. So I got a sense of my, my relative seniority or lack of it.
Do you actually kiss hands?
You do on that first occasion. You don't after that.
Yeah. Now, nobody must wriggle except Leo. Now, come on, last one.
The man who kissed the Queen's hand 40 years before Tony Blair was Harold Macmillan. He cultivated the image of a Tory patrician of the old school. The way he left Downing Street landed the Queen in a political row.
In the early 1960s, the country was in a ferment of novelty and populist change. But the Conservatives were stuck in the past. Unlike Labour, they had no democratic way of electing their leader. If a Conservative Prime Minister resigned while in office, it was up to the Queen to appoint his successor. In 1963, she was the victim of the party's failure to move with the times.
Macmillan had been in power for 6.5 years when he was suddenly struck down with suspected cancer. It led to a crisis in his party and changed for good the way Tory leaders were chosen.
I got through the cabinet just. The afternoon I collapsed again. I'm afraid Sir John Richardson said, your life, you're finished. It's over.
His illness caught all his colleagues at the party conference in Blackpool. Normally, a kind of papal conclave would meet privately to agree a successor for the monarch to summon. This time, it looked like being fought out in public. The heir apparent was the Deputy Prime Minister, Rab Butler.
There is rising hope of success.
But he was not the automatic choice. Two hereditary peers were likely candidates, if they were ready to give up their titles and become MPs.
Order, please. Order.
One was the Earl of Hume, the Foreign Secretary. But the first to throw his hat in the ring was his cabinet colleague, Viscount Hailsham.
They were just about to wind up the proceedings, Chairman saying, "Well, thank you, Lord Hailsham," very inspiring address, and then he suddenly got up again. He said, "There is one further word I will say to you."
That my intention is, after deep thought, to disclaim my peerage.
That night, I'm sure that Hailsham, in his heart, felt the throb of destiny. He thought the golden ball had landed in his lap.
This blatant electioneering was awkward for the Queen. Her duty was to make the appointment without getting caught up in party wrangling. And this time, that looked difficult.
All of us are anxious above all things to protect the prerogative of the Crown. The prerogative of the Crown is absolute in these matters, and the Crown can select whichever Prime Minister the King or Queen of the time may feel to be the right choice.
In making her choice, the Queen would, of course, take advice. From his hospital room in London, Harold Macmillan had been taking soundings within his party. He wanted to recommend a successor to the Queen, advice he knew could split his own cabinet. On October the 18th, he resigned, and the Queen came to visit him in hospital.
She was put into the matron's room. A strange scene of resignation, unique in history. And then I said, I have to resign because I'm too ill to go on, and my doctors tell me I can never be well enough, certainly for a year, to do anything active and never to do this sort of work. And then she was as charming and expressed her regret and her willingness to give me some reward. It was very touching, it was very moving for me. And then she said, I would like your advice as to your successor.
Macmillan had his memorandum at the ready.
I said, Adam, I prepared this document, and I feel it to be a great strain for you and even more strain for me to try to read it to you. Will you take it? And she said, no, I'd like you to read it. And I read it to her, every word of it. She took it away. There was no one there except her. And then she left.
As soon as she got back to the palace, the Queen followed Macmillan's advice.
Lord Hume has been invited to form a government. The Foreign Secretary was called to Buckingham Palace for a 40-minute audience with the Queen, which ended less than half an hour ago with an official announcement.
The choice of Hume was controversial, and two cabinet members refused to serve under him. Macmillan and the Queen were criticised by supporters of Butler. As for Macmillan, it turned out he never had cancer and lived on to a ripe old age. So he could have spared the Queen all the trouble. Belatedly, the Tories adopted a voting system to choose their leaders. And some years later, the Queen confided to an Australian Prime Minister how difficult it had all been.
She mentioned that when Macmillan had retired, she was in the invidious position of having to commission a Prime Minister. And I remember her saying, thank goodness they fixed that situation.
Hume didn't last long. After the next election, the Queen encountered her first Labour Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. His party promised widespread reform, and she might have worried that anti-monarchists had now arrived at Downing Street.
She must have thought, awaited this occasion with great curiosity to see what barbarians we might turn out to be.
Whatever she thought of a Labour government, it was never betrayed in any way by her manner, by anything that she said. I mean, one assumed that the royal family would have been, by background and association, conservative. But she never gave any indication of political respect for someone or contempt for. It's not a hint of it.
One test of the relationship was the civil list, the money governments give the monarchy to carry out its duties. Its value had been eroded by the high inflation of the 60s and 70s. Prince Philip had warned they were going into the red, and he joked that they might have to move into smaller premises.
After Prince Philip made these remarks, I said that maybe the horses would have to be removed from the Royal Mews, thinking, well, that would be quite a vivid illustration of the kind of extreme measure that might be enforced on the royal family if the civil list were not reviewed. I have to say that I got into terrible trouble from the Queen the next morning, who saw my remarks in the paper and said to me, "I hope you didn't really say that."
A socialist government committed to redistributing wealth might have been difficult. But Wilson turned out to be an ally.
Harold Wilson adored the Queen. He could see, shrewd leader as he was, we were heading for possibly a public explosion against the Queen. And she, sensitive as always, and keeping her ear to the ground on what was happening, realised that she got to make a compromise. So she offered to bear part of this increased cost in the civil list, and that enabled Harold to get it through a very reluctant cabinet.
In 1976, Wilson suddenly announced his resignation. After the 8 years he'd been in power, the Queen wanted to thank him publicly. Her private secretary got on to number 10. Why didn't the Prime Minister ask the Queen to a farewell dinner, just like Churchill had done? The problem came when the idea was put to Harold Wilson.
The first time in my relationship with him, I got the rough end of his tongue. He was very cross with me because he said this was inflating him above what was appropriate, that Winston Churchill had been the great war leader. That was exceptional. He didn't think it was appropriate for him to put himself forward in that way. And when he got all that off his chest, he turned to me and said, "But would she come?"
Republicans and monarchists alike came to the dinner. There were exotic rumours about why Wilson had suddenly resigned, but the Queen accepted his explanation that he was tired and it was time to go.
She understood that, and the dinner at number 10 was an utterly appropriate way of marking a proper end to a very distinguished career of public service.
So by inviting herself to dinner, she was supporting Harold Wilson against the sort of rumour mongers and so on?
It was intended to be a gracious and supportive acknowledgement of all that he had done. We had an absolutely splendid occasion at number 10, which the Queen marked when she spoke after dinner by saying that it was nice for the two tenants of the Tide cottages at either end of the mall to get together.
The 1970s were notorious for industrial battles between unions and governments over pay. Harold Wilson's successor in Downing Street, James Callaghan, lived on a knife edge in Parliament. An election never seemed far away.
Julia, 40 Parliament, answer that question.
I'd like to say to you that there are negotiations going on.
Shut the negotiations, answer the question, don't be a politician.
When he was under pressure, the Queen certainly knew how to bolster his morale.
Now and again, we would go out into the garden and walk round and talk and look at the flowers and discuss things there.
On one occasion, it was springtime, she picked a sprig of lily of the valley for him and put it in his buttonhole. So when I met him as he came down from the Queen's drawing room, and we went back to number 10, he was immensely pleased and proudly displayed to me what he got in his buttonhole. And obviously the Queen had scored a bullseye with that one.
It fell to the Callaghan government to organise celebrations for the Queen's Silver Jubilee. Some in the Labour cabinet had been a bit reluctant to push the royalist boat out. Not Callaghan.
Jim Callaghan's devoted to the Queen, and he was wise enough to know that it was not a bad thing for the government, which was not terribly popular at the time, to shelter under her popularity.
And he thought the cabinet itself ought to mark the occasion with a present.
I said, I want £25 from each of you. And so they all coughed up.
One of my colleagues suggested a clock set in a lump of Welsh anthracite coal. Somebody else, I think quite seriously, not ironically, suggested a saddle. In the end, the Queen chose it for us, because Jim Callaghan, being a practical man, said, we'll ask her what she wants.
And I said to the controller at Buckingham Palace, got any ideas? He said, I will inquire. He went away and he came back and he said, well, there is. He said, you know, you'll hardly believe this, but there's only one coffee pot in Windsor that will serve 12 cups of coffee. And so when we go to Balmoral, we have to wrap it up in a bit of newspaper and take it with us. So I said, good, we know. So Audrey, my wife, bought a very nice silver coffee pot that served 12 cups of coffee. It was arranged that I should go and see the Queen and present this, and she said, oh, don't come by yourself, bring the cabinet.
So we all turned up to present the coffee pot. Queen made a speech in which she said, I want to particularly thank the Prime Minister for his forbearance. When a similar occasion was held for Queen Victoria, the Prime Minister of the day, Lord Salisbury, thought the appropriate present was a portrait of himself. And I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for not having the same idea on this occasion. Now, for the Queen to say this, it's just slightly daring, and we all laughed genuinely.
I don't know what it meant. She wouldn't have welcomed a portrait of me. And then very nicely, very kindly afterwards, she told me that she had inscribed on the base of the coffee pot that we'd given her the names of all the members of the cabinet. That was a rather nice gesture.
A high point of the Jubilee was a speech the Queen made to both Houses of Parliament. But one phrase in it caused a rare political stir. It was taken as criticism of government policy.
This was the only occasion in my 40-something years at number 10 where there was the slightest frisson and a belief that something might have gone wrong.
It was a time of strong nationalist feeling in Scotland and Wales. The Callaghan government had nailed its colours to the mast of devolution.
What she said could be seen by some to be opposed to the idea of devolution, as well, of course, as being opposed, as it undoubtedly was, to the idea of Scottish independence.
I number kings and queens of England and of Scotland, and princes of Wales among my ancestors. And so I can readily understand these aspirations.
What mattered, of course, was the emphasis.
But I cannot forget that I was crowned Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
The Prime Minister came back from that not best pleased and actually asked me, had we seen this speech in advance? So I looked it up and the answer was, yes, you had. Perhaps if we had been rather sharper-witted in number 10, we would have spotted it.
22 years later, a Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly were finally created within the United Kingdom and were formally opened by the Queen.
I have trust in the good judgment of the Scottish people. I have faith in your commitment to their service, and I am confident in the future of Scotland.
Another part of the Queen's job as head of state is to be supreme governor of the Church of England. As such, she officially appoints all its bishops. They owe the Queen their allegiance, which can sometimes take a bishop in surprising directions.
She was talking to two or three of us, and suddenly her evening bag burst open, and everything, lipsticks, compact, everything went in every direction over this floor, which, being shiny, carried it right across. Well, the other two chaps immediately got down on their knees and started grabbling for these various things. I noticed that her glasses had shot off underneath a table which was covered by a heavy white cloth. And so I got under the table and retrieved the glasses. When I came back, the others had got all the stuff back to the Queen, so I handed her her glasses. And she looked at everyone and said, you see, bishops do have some uses.
And will you preserve unto the bishops and clergy of England and to the churches there committed to their charge?
At the coronation, the Queen swore to uphold the Protestant religion and the Church of England. To her, that is much more than symbolic.
All this I promise to do.
In today's more multicultural society, church and state are still closely interwoven.
When I was Home Secretary, it was one of my duties to go and read out the oath which every incoming bishop has to swear in the presence of the Queen, kneeling on a footstool in front of her.
She is the head of the church, and the bishops have to pledge their complete loyalty to her. That goes back to Henry VIII.
Then after that, the Queen and the new bishop talk. They have a cheerful conversation, and the Home Secretary is there. And this wasn't regarded by the Queen as simply a trivial occasion to be got rid of as soon as possible. She is interested, and her conversation about church matters shows that she knows a lot about them, thinks they're important, and is interested in her position as head of the church.
One of the clergy with whom the Queen has most personal contact is the Dean of Windsor. That's an appointment she gets directly involved in. There was no rubber stamp for Michael Mann when his was one of the names put forward.
My wife and I turned up at Windsor Castle on a Saturday tea time, and there was a dinner party where we were all scrutinised, and then the next morning I celebrated Holy Communion and then preached. And then the Queen extracted my wife and I, and we drove at breakneck speed down to the castle for lunch. And unfortunately, during lunch, I had a bit of a contretemps with Princess Margaret, and I could see my wife saying, "Oh, he's blown it." After lunch, I was taken off in one direction by the Queen, and my wife was taken off in another direction by Princess Margaret, and we were questioned and grilled for about 3/4 of an hour, and then dismissed. And about 6 weeks later, the telephone went early one morning when I was feeling particularly grumpy, so I said, "Yes, hello," and a voice at the other end said, "This is the Queen, will you come and be my Dean of Windsor?" And that's how I got the job.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty.
Like bishops, every member of Parliament has to pledge his or her loyalty to the Queen as head of state.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. It is an allegiance primarily to the country, to its system of government, and that includes the Queen as head of state. I mean, I'm sure there'll be all sorts of arguments about whether you amend the oath or not, but personally, I'm perfectly happy with it as it is.
But it's more of a problem for MPs who'd prefer Britain to be a republic.
If you're elected a Member of Parliament, if you do not take the oath of allegiance, you are prevented by law from sitting in Parliament.
As a committed Republican, under protest, I take the oath required of me by law under the Parliamentary Oaths Act of 1866 to allow me to represent my constituency. I, Tony Benn, do solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and her successors according to law.
The fact that every member of Parliament who is a Republican like myself has to tell a lie is very offensive, 'tis to me.
The Privy Council, Your Majesty.
Senior politicians take a more elaborate oath of allegiance when they join the Queen's Privy Council, the ancient body which today formally approves a lot of government business.
To pledge to protect the Queen from all foreign potentates, prelates, potentates and powers. And at the end of that, when they read it to me, I said, I haven't agreed. Oh, they said, you don't have to. So I said, what do you mean? They said, we have administered the oath. The oath is an injection. I never understood the title administration of oaths, but if I have an oath administered, I stand there and I'm changed externally.
No, that's a little unfair. It's explained to you. I dare say Tony Benn took a variation of the oath. It's not an injection. It's rather easy and pleasant ceremony.
One entitled the Consular Fees Amendment Order 1990.
Approved.
I don't think the Queen thinks the Privy Council has any power. I mean, the Queen knows very well that her orders in Council are not her orders, that they're the Minister's orders.
Drafts of 17 orders in Council.
The Privy Council conducts business on its feet. That normally keeps the meetings short.
1923.
The clerk to the Privy Council read out to appoint a chaplain to Wadham College, Oxford. And the Queen said, why do I appoint a chaplain to Wadham? Michael Foot was then President of the Council, Leader of the House of Commons, standing there and said, well, Ma'am, I can explain all this to you. Wadham's my college. And began to talk about the history of Wadham. I think we've got to the Reformation when the Queen said, I think that's enough about Wadham College for one morning. Thank you very much indeed. And appointed a new chaplain.
Approved.
And that, Your Majesty, concludes the business for today's Council.
Every day, the Queen has government business delivered to her in red boxes, just as her ministers do. Some papers need her signature, others are sent to keep her informed. Her uncle, Edward VIII, was criticised for not taking his red boxes seriously enough. But the Queen works through them all.
It doesn't matter whether the Queen's going out for the evening or anything like that. When she comes back, the boxes have got to be done just the same, ready for the morning.
In this existence, the job and the life go on together because you can't really divide it up. The boxes and the communications just keep on coming. And of course, with modern communications, they come even quicker. I mean, luckily I'm a quick reader, so I can get through a lot of reading in quite a short time.
As a result, she's also a shrewd judge of political realities. Lord Carrington discovered this back in the 60s when he was First Lord of the Admiralty.
I was sitting doing nobody any harm in the First Lord's room in the Admiralty when the telephone rang. And it was Sir Michael O'Dean, the Queen's private secretary. And he said to me, the Queen wants to see you at 6:30.
The government had just announced an expensive refit for the Royal Yacht Britannia. As the Admiralty Minister, it was a decision for which he was responsible.
So rather nervously, I went off to Buckingham Palace at 6:30, and the Queen said to me, I see the Britannia's being refitted. And I said, yes, Your Majesty, she was rather badly built, and we can't have her breaking down in mid-Atlantic with you on board and so on. And she said, rather icily, I see. And then she said, then who's paying? And feeling on rather better ground, I said, ma'am, it's all on the Admiralty vote. And she said, even more icily, I see. You pay, and I get the blame. I went out with my tail between my legs, but I thought that was absolutely right, because it was exactly what was happening. I respected her very much after that. I thought that was splendid. I didn't enjoy it.
There have been other steely moments like that. But the Queen putting her foot down is something the public doesn't see.
The House of Commons presented a loyal address to the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh to celebrate what we call the betrothal of her son to Princess Diana, she became. And we all went off to Buckingham Palace. The Speaker of the House of Commons, George Thomas, in his full ceremonial clothes, Michael Foot and me on one side, Mrs Thatcher and Will White on the other. It was just like A Man for All Seasons. People were hanging around waiting to present these addresses. And we eventually got to the Queen. She announced that the Spaniards had objected to the royal yacht using Gibraltar for the honeymoon. And we all tutted that the Spaniards should behave in such a intolerable way. And she said, I told them, it's my son, and it's my yacht, and it's my dockyard. A very, very formidable way to behave.
And the Queen got her way. Her son left her dockyard on her yacht, seen off by hundreds of seaborne Gibraltarians. Knowing how to handle people is one of the Queen's skills. Her music-loving Prime Minister Edward Heath, for example. She had the measure of him. Soon after the Gulf War had ended, the Queen was entertaining a group of international leaders, among them her former Prime Minister. Before the fighting started, Heath had gone to Iraq as an elder statesman to negotiate the release of 36 British hostages held by Saddam Hussein.
We were talking before dinner, and at one moment I had a feeling that the Queen was looking at my back, and so I gently turned round. And she said, "Yes, here you are." So I left my group and walked over to her. And it was the American Secretary of State who was talking to her.
No, I just wonder so much. Is he? I mean, he is master of his own situation, is he?
Absolutely.
He really is.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it, to have somebody who's been morally, nominally, and every way else defeated.
The more we tried to ram it in, the more his people were supported. So she said, well, the Secretary of State has great problems. And I said, yes, he ought to go there for himself, as I did, and see what it's like and talk to Saddam Hussein. And the Secretary of State said, oh, certainly not. If he wants to talk, he should come to Washington.
And also, we told him exactly what would happen if they didn't. And that's what happened.
Didn't tell him face to face.
No, but he couldn't go to Baghdad like
Why
you
not,
could.
ma'am? I went to Baghdad.
Well, I knew you did. You're expendable now.
Criticize, yes, I'm expendable, yes, that's
You're
true.
expendable. He couldn't go to Baghdad at that moment.
Heath's successor as Tory leader Margaret Thatcher took no hostages in politics.
The ladies not for turn. We should back the workers and not the shirkers.
Politics had seldom been so polarized or so passionate. But in the presence of the Queen, the Iron Lady was your humble servant.
She was extremely respectful of the institution of monarchy and of the Queen personally, almost deferential sometimes. Indeed, I think probably Lady Thatcher could execute the deepest curtsy of any of Her Majesty's subjects.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
You've had a very long day.
It ran over just a little.
In Margaret Thatcher, the Queen for the first time had a British Prime Minister who was a woman, and the same age. From the start, there was speculation that they wouldn't get on.
The Queen's household, apart from her lady-in-waiting, is essentially masculine. The political field in which Mrs. Thatcher had grown up and become leader of the opposition, then Prime Minister, was essentially masculine. And here were these two women, one the head of state, the other the first woman Prime Minister, and they had to create a relationship.
I think sometimes you men are a bit too conscious of this. The Queen was a monarch. It happens that she was a perfect lady. I was a Prime Minister. It happened that I was a woman. But it was the monarch talking to the Prime Minister.
Rumours that the two women had a difficult relationship reached a climax in 1986, with specific reports that the Queen was unhappy with the government's social and economic policies.
Mrs. Thatcher was agitated about it, not least because she thought it would do her some political damage. I remember her saying to me, all the little old ladies up and down the country, when they read this, they'll say, that Mrs. Thatcher, she's gone and upset the Queen. She shouldn't be doing it.
I do not think the Queen would have had any part whatsoever in propagating such a feeling.
But Margaret Thatcher's staff at Number 10 believed there was something behind the reports.
Those sort of views were definitely being expressed by members of Buckingham Palace staff. They were being expressed to staff of other royal families in Europe. I know that for a fact.
Even if she did say it, all right, she may have felt something, but there was never any difficulty in saying anything to me. Any difficulty at all.
It seemed that the story had arisen from the way unguarded remarks by the Royal Press Secretary had been interpreted. The Queen was upset and insisted that he apologize in person to the Prime Minister.
Mrs. Thatcher was staying at Holyrood that night, and I was plonked at lunch between the Queen and the Prime Minister to show that there was no harm done. So when I started to apologise, I was told, particularly by Mrs. Thatcher, not to worry, dear. It was just one of these things.
I don't think she was against Mrs. Thatcher anywhere near as much as the papers tried to make out. I'm sure the Queen was immensely proud of the retaking of the Falklands, not just because Andrew was down there in the task force. I think she would have understood that some of the trade union reforms, some of the economic reforms, some of the hard, rather polarised policies, you could say, of the 80s were necessary. And after all, she lives with the Duke of Edinburgh. I mean, he's by no means a lefty in disguise.
Queen is a person with strong preferences, opinions, and enough knowledge of the world, you know, to test those opinions and to be always testing them. But she feels quite clearly, she feels it is her duty to keep those under very strict restraint. So you only occasionally at the end of a day, with the final sort of glass of something before going to bed, you finally get a glimpse of them. But while she's performing, while she's there, being a queen, you don't.
One after another, the Queen's 10 prime ministers have supported her as she supported them. And she still has the overwhelming support of the people. But in an age where nothing is sacred, there is now talk that the monarchy could one day come to an end.
That's the fashionable view. I don't think that myself. I think I wouldn't be at all surprised if long after I'm dead and buried, in 50 years' time, the monarchy will still be there, especially when you are faced with the alternative and you say, what on earth would we do?
I think the Queen is a wonderful professional. I think she does do a very good job, personally. If we have to have a Queen, this is the best Queen to have.
I think a lot of people of my generation have decided, no, actually, we think this is a better system, rationally. And so the reason why I think the monarchy is more secure than people think it is that I think that people have, as well as a traditional and an emotional attachment to it, I think there is a rational case that can be made.
She has performed it all magnificently, and may she go on. I look forward to the Diamond Jubilee if I'm still around.
By the end of this Jubilee year, the Queen will have reigned longer than all but 3 of the kings and queens of England. These pictures of Princess Elizabeth, her sister Margaret, and their mother were taken in Scotland a week before the Second World War broke out. They've never been shown before. Her father, George VI, has been the Queen's inspiration as sovereign. She never forgets that the burden of the throne came to him because of his brother's abdication. With every year, her burden becomes more lonely. But her sense of duty means that she could never consider abdication.
When the Queen was consecrated at the coronation, the very word consecration means set aside. She saw herself as set aside for a particular purpose, and that she could no more give that up than I, even though I'm retired, can stop being a bishop because I've been consecrated as a bishop.
When occasionally you get stories that the Queen is likely to abdicate, I think you can utterly disregard them. The coronation oath means to the Queen that she will remain Queen for as long as she is able to, for the rest of her life.
My first wife, who died, was very ill with cancer, and I told the Queen I thought it was time for me to retire. And her comment immediately was, "That's all right for you, I can't."
I can remember ringing her up on one occasion to tell her that Queen Juliana of the Netherlands had abdicated. There was a silence at the other end of the phone, and then she said, "Typical Dutch," she said, and put the phone down on me.
I think she might hand over a great deal of the duties, try to lessen the load, but I think it'd be very unlikely that she'd abdicate. She would see that as a dereliction of duty.
The overwhelming public response to the Queen Mother's death and the beauty of the ceremonial showed the almost spiritual power of the monarchy to bind the nation together. The Queen understands that.
She loves her country. She loves its history. And I think she understands that, even though many people may think the position is an anachronism, that it serves quite a useful purpose, particularly at critical times in the nation's history.
Only a profound sense of that history enables a nation to face up to the challenges of its future. The Queen has loyally provided that historical compass through all the social and economic upheavals of the last 50 years. Her contribution to Britain's stability is incalculable, but huge.
I think she wanted Britain to be walking a little taller, and I think that has now happened, you see. I think there's been a 25-year fight back in this country. I think the Queen is now monarch of a much prouder, more self-confident and a richer country.
In an often impatient world, the Queen knows the monarchy must evolve. But she takes the long-term view. The more change there is around her, the more she feels she must keep the faith. That's not just a constitutional judgment, it comes from deep within her.
I remember her saying to me once, the trouble is that everyone's wanting to change everything just when I've got to the age when I don't want any change. And she has remained constant throughout her life. That perhaps is one of her greatest strengths. The Queen is one person you can count on.